Okay, let's have a look at risk and uncertainty. So something to consider in our performance management system. So what do we mean by risk? So possibility, there could be several different outcomes from a business decision, right? So risk is any time that something doesn't go to plan. Risk can be positive or negative, so we call it upside risk and downside risk. Upside being the positive one, so it goes better than planned. Risk is inherent in business decisions and cannot be removed, so there's no such thing as a risk-free business. Understanding an organization's risk appetite is key, right? So how much risk are they willing to accept? Uncertainty, so slightly different, and this is where you tend to score your technical marks in this area, is pointing out the difference between a risk and an uncertainty. So an uncertainty is there's too little information about the future. It can be reduced by sourcing more accurate information. So I think about this like my wife loves to send me out to the supermarket or the local shop, let's say, for a chocolate bar, and she's partial to a Galaxy cookie crumble bar, and over the course of our marriage she must have sent me out at least 100 times, probably more, but we'll say 100 to keep the math easy, and say 6 times out of that 100 they didn't have it in stock, right? So the risk of me not getting her the Galaxy cookie crumble bar is 6%, and so you can quantify a risk, and we can decide whether we're willing to live with that or not. Right. Whereas an uncertainty is it says that there's too little information. So imagine that we have moved house now and I'm going to the new shop for the first time. So I just don't know whether they even stock a Galaxy cookie crumble bar or not. And generally the way we would deal with this is my wife would say something like, well, if they don't have a Galaxy cookie crumble bar, get me something else, Maltesers or something like that. That's probably a bit more common, and that's how we would deal with it. So a risk can be quantified. You can put a percentage chance of it happening on. An uncertainty is basically an unknown, and the way we deal with unknowns is scenario planning. So needed for success. Without uncertainty, there is nothing to distinguish the organization from its competitors. So, if there was no risk, there'd be no competition, I guess is what it's saying there. Everyone would just make the same decision. Future strategy. So understanding and managing risk is necessary to establish its future objectives. So what are the risks coming at in the future, and how is my plan going to help me avoid them or potentially turn them into opportunities? So balance of risk and rewards. Risk appetite determines the approach. Our future focus. So risk forces managers to think about the future, not just the day-to-day. So if we have a risk in culture, or we've embedded a risk in our culture, then it's a good one. So like I always imagine if a customer rings up from another country, let's say we're in the UK and somebody from Germany rings up and wants to place an order, if I've got a management that think about risk, they could go, oh my God, how am I going to credit check this German customer? I've got a process for credit checking the UK customers, but not necessarily the Germans, and there's a chance they won't pay us. If we don't have the right culture, you can imagine the manager would just get excited that they have an overseas customer, but a risk-focused management team would sort of go, well, okay, what could go wrong here, and let's mitigate it. If there's no drive forward, they will be left behind as competitors benefit from taking risks. Yeah, so if you, I would say the best way to think about it is doing nothing is also a risk. People think doing nothing is not taking a risk, but doing nothing is a decision in its own right and has its own risks, such as being left behind. Improve control. So managing risks helps identify where more control measures or urgent control is required. So if we have a strategy, and let's say we're thinking of implementing artificial intelligence, and replacing our customer service team with them, I think the risk is that we will annoy our customers and we wouldn't know about that. So we'll have to put some controls in place to go, right, how are we going to know if this is annoying our customers, if we're actually solving their problems or they're just getting annoyed and leaving. So maybe we have to keep some customer service teams in place, and they have to sort of proactively call the customer after they've used the AI and ask them, how's your experience and what do you think? And so identifying risks allows you to then focus attention on those risks. Risk owners ensure the risk is managed and controlled at all levels in the organization. So we want to put someone specifically in charge of the risks. So we said earlier, identifying the risk appetite is key. So we can have risk averse, we can have risk neutral, and we can have risk seeking. So it's a bit of a spectrum, I would say. In real life, like, no one's truly risk averse because you wouldn't go out the door, and no one's truly risk seeking because, well, you'd be probably a gambling addict in that case. So we're somewhere on the spectrum, and a risk averse. So it says there, we'll only select a risky outcome if the level of risk is outweighed by the expected return. Broadly, they dislike risk and will avoid it where possible. Risk neutral, so ignore risk when making decisions. Will select the option with the highest expected return regardless of the level of risk. And risk seeking considers risk as part of decision making, tries to make a higher return by taking risk. If two outcomes have the same expected return, they will take the riskier option. Right, so I would say, let's say I inherited some money, right, £10,000, and I don't want to just hold that money, I want to invest it. So if I'm a risk averse person, I'm going to invest it in a savings account and I'm going to get my 5%. So that's a nice safe option. If I'm a risk neutral person, then I want to balance the risk and the reward. So I want to invest, but I'm not going to buy Tesla stock, which is really, really risky. Instead, I would probably buy an index fund where I buy into this index fund, and the fund holds loads of different companies spread across the whole world. So there's different index funds you can get. So there's some that focus in AI. There's some that like match the FTSE 100. There's the top biggest 100 companies on the London Stock Exchange. There's some that mirror the S&P 500. That's the US equivalent of the FTSE 100. But the point is that I'm broadly diversified. So I'm taking a risk, but there's it's sort of balanced between the risk and the reward. Risk seeking, on the other hand, I'd probably buy Tesla because it's like, oh my God, it's going to go amazing, Tesla to the moon type thing. So the risk seeker, I think about the risk averse person is the sort of pessimist. The risk seeking person is the eternal optimist. Everything's going to go great. And the risk neutral person, they will try and balance risk and return. So managing risk, we've got to think about the likelihood of it happening and the impact if it was to happen. So we've got 4 approaches. We've got transfer, accept, reduce, and abandon. So we're going to use our TARA approach. Okay, so depending on the likelihood and the impact, will give us our approach. So let's have a look here. So transfer, so low likelihood, high impact, we transfer. So this makes me think of like car crashes, right? So low likelihood, probably on average, everybody has 1 or 2 crashes while they're driving, but you're going to drive from the age of 18 to maybe the age of 70. So let's say that's over 50 years of driving, and you're going to have 2 crashes. So low likelihood of it happening, but it really, really sucks when it does happen. High impact. So we take out insurance, right? So transfers make it someone else's problem. In a business, they also have the opportunity to outsource as well. So you'd insure, you'd outsource. Accept. So low likelihood, low impact. So if it's it doesn't happen too often and it's not that bad when it does happen, I'll just deal with it when it happens. So I guess I'm trying to think of an example. So with my kids, for example, they don't choke very often on their food. And if they do, I'm usually sat right next to them while we're having dinner, so I just give them a pat on the back, so it doesn't really cause too many issues. So I could cut their food up into really, really small bits, so there's just no risk of them choking whatsoever. I only give them soft food that they can't possibly choke on. But that's what I'll accept. I'll live with it. I'll deal with it if it happens. So I'll pat them on the back, and if it's really bad, I'll grab them out the chair and give them the Heimlich maneuver. Reduce, so high likelihood, low impact. So this one makes me think of like shoplifting in retailers. So it probably happens every single day, right? So it's high likelihood somebody like every day something gets shoplifted, but they're probably not stealing thousands of pounds worth of stuff. It's maybe hundreds of pounds worth of stuff, or tens of pounds, and so it's not too bad. So I try and reduce. This is where I put controls in place. So I'll put cameras in place and security guards, and I'll tag the more expensive items and have those scanners near the door, so when you try and walk out with a tag on, it alerts. I'll put signs up saying I prosecute shoplifters to deter people from doing it. And then you've got high likelihood, high impact. This would be abandon. Right, so I just would not continue with this project. So if we were putting our like when my kids were younger, we'd put them in a baby seat on top of the counter, and I eventually got to the point where I thought, no, that's they're too likely to fall out of there, and if they fall out of there from the top of the counter and onto the floor, then that's going to be really, really bad. So we just stopped doing that. So you abandon, basically. Yeah, I don't know why. Risk management always makes you think of like kids. It's basically like baby proofing the house, isn't it? So when I'm baby proofing the house, I look around and go, right, how likely is it that to happen, and how bad would it be? So falling off the couch is probably highly likely, but low impact. So I'll try and reduce. I'll put some soft things on, like the hard furnishings, like protection on the corners of the table and things like that. The low likelihood, high impact stuff, deal with it if it happens. I'll have the NHS on speed dial if anything like that happens. Abandon. So I wouldn't leave anything like on the floor that would be really bad for them, like bleach or anything like that. Just no way they're going to have any opportunity to get in contact with stuff like that. And then accept, they love to run around and they might fall over while they're doing it, but I think you've got to accept some things. Luckily they're more stable now than they used to be, so they don't fall over as often. Okay, so that is our risk management.